Masters, I want to talk tonight about what I think is one of the biggest issues facing the modern world. That is the problem of gender alienation. Gender alienation is just the idea that men and women are finding it harder and harder to cooperate, to understand each other, and to work together to build a just society and to raise the next generation. I actually believe that gender alienation is the root of two other problems that are very significant and very powerful in their own right. That is political polarization and fertility collapse. Just to start the discussion, here's an interesting finding from the field of psychology. It turns out that as societies become more gender equal in terms of laws, the sex differences in personality become larger. Isn't that interesting? I think most people would have expected that these differences are caused by the constraints imposed by traditional society. And as you relax those constraints, men and women become more and more similar. In fact, the reverse is true. So here's what I want to propose to you. Here's my schematic view of how this is working. Male and female personalities are pretty close together, but they don't overlap completely. There's people on the extremes on both sides. And these people on the fringes are so far away from the opposite sex that they can't understand each other, they can't talk to each other, they can't build relationships. Now, these fringes aren't that big they're not that large relative to the total, but there's still millions of people in these extremes. And many of them are not very happy with their situation, so they deserve our sympathy. Furthermore, these circles are moving apart. So in the future, the people on these sides are going to become, the side groups are going to become larger and larger. Let me give you some data to back up this story. Here's an infographic that shows how politics has become a problem for dating. So this says that 70% of Democrats would not consider dating a Trump supporter. And something similar is true for Republicans and Clinton voters. Now, this fact alone isn't about gender, but let's look at the next slide. This infographic shows how different groups voted in recent elections. You can see that in 2022, the Republicans won 3 out of these 4 groups: married men, married women, and unmarried men. But unmarried women voted overwhelmingly for Democrats. If you do some math on these numbers, you find out that about 25 million people won't be able to find a partner who matches their political party. And from the previous slide, we saw that a large percentage of people won't even consider a match, won't consider dating across political lines. So the end result is millions and millions of people are not going to be able to get married just because of politics. Let's look at how this affects other countries. You can see that this ideological gap is happening in several countries. The biggest gap is in South Korea. Here, men are really becoming more conservative, women are becoming more liberal, and that gap is getting really large. And I think it's interesting to look at South Korea in particular, because they have a problem that is really extreme in terms of fertility. This graph shows the fertility rates by country. Only Israel in this selection is above replacement fertility. You need a 2.1 children per woman to have replacement fertility. Most countries are beneath that mark. Korea is much below replacement. They're at 0.8. This level of fertility, they're going to lose 97% of their population in 100 years. That's a catastrophe. So what's going on in Korea? Well, a lot of things are going on, too many to talk about in one speech. But one hot button issue that's interesting to me is the topic of feminism. Feminism originated in the West, but it spread to other countries in Asia as well. And it's a big point of contention in the political sphere In Korea, women are expected to give up their careers when they get married and stay at home to raise children. And of course, the feminists are not happy about that. But in Korea, there's also this very significant anti-feminist bloc among the men who are really pushing back. And the reason I think this is interesting, and one aspect of Korean society that's very relevant, is that Korea has a draft that applies only to men. So imagine that you're a Korean guy and you started your career, you started a business, maybe you're having some initial success. Then the government calls you up and says, you've got to serve in the military for 2 years. So you go and do that. Then you come home, come back from the military, but your girlfriend dumps you because you're not doing enough housework. Well, maybe it's true that you didn't do enough housework, but you're probably not going to be very sympathetic to that complaint because of this draft that happens to you. So one lens I use, and this is getting to my personal opinion, one lens I think is useful is to see feminism as this process of putting men on trial. And I think this is valid. Speaking as a man, I don't think this is a terrible idea fundamentally, because men have done some bad things historically. What I think is the problem is that there's thousands of activists and professors who have a professional mandate. They get paid to defend the interests of women and promote the position of women in society. And there's no corresponding group of writers or thinkers whose job is to promote the male perspective and the male side of the argument. So it's not that the problem is the trial itself, is that there's a trial and there's no lawyers for the defense. I think another useful metaphor for gender alienation is the idea of a strike. Strike is a situation where two groups of people rely on each other and need to work together in order to survive. But both sides feel that the other side is being unreasonable and unfair, so they refuse to work together. And the way to resolve a strike is by negotiations. You bring both sides to the table and discuss things, have an honest dialogue where each side makes compromises. Now, again, speaking as a man, I'm happy to make compromises if I feel that the other side is making compromises as well, which is not something that I always feel. Friends, fixing gender alienation is critical for our society as a whole. It's critical for individuals, and it's incredibly important for the future of humanity. Let's be serious about how to heal this wound in our culture and prevent men and women from drifting further and further apart. Thanks very much.